Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They thought they could fence me out of my own land. They thought forged papers and empty threats would break me. But when Sunset Valley HOA came for my family's legacy, they started a war they couldn't win. This is the story of how I took it all back and made them regret ever trying. I've always believed that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars or stocks, but in the freedom to stand on your own land and breathe air that no one else could claim. My name is Nick Garrett. I'm 39 years old, and I am the proud owner of a modest fishing cabin tucked away in the rugged mountains of Colorado. It's not just any patch of dirt with a shack on it. It's a piece of my family's soul, a living memory of my grandfather, who first built the place back in 1952 when there was nothing but endless forest and the sparkling serenity of the lake. The cabin itself isn't much to look at. Rough-hewn logs, a creaky dock stretching out over the water, a rusted tin chimney that smokes like an old man's pipe when the wood stove's burning. But every beam, every nail, every stone in the fire pit tells a story. It's a sanctuary passed down through generations, a place untouched by the creeping hand of development. Officially, the land was recorded long ago as private property, free from any homeowners association or municipal covenants. No rules about lawn heights, paint colors, or who could fish from my dock. Just pure, simple ownership the way it was meant to be, or at least it used to be. About 2 years ago, a new development started sprouting up a mile down the lake. A sparkling new subdivision called Sunset Valley. It boasted polished sidewalks, sterile rows of identical beige houses, and, of course, an enthusiastic homeowners association eager to micromanage every blade of grass. I didn't think much of it at first. Let them have their gated dreams in uniformity. I had my cabin, my forest, and my freedom. Besides, my land was separated by natural boundaries, dense woods, and a rocky ridge. It seemed impossible that our worlds could collide. But peace never lasts when bureaucracy smells an opportunity. I started noticing small changes. Sunset Valley's walking trails kept inching closer to the lake's edge. Fancy new signs appeared warning of community property along the shoreline. And HOA patrols, guys in golf carts wearing security vests 2 sizes too big, began cruising the roads nearby. Still, I shrugged it off. My deed was ironclad, and I wasn't about to start a fight over what I assumed were simple misunderstandings. As far as I was concerned, I was a ghost to them. Invisible, untouchable, irrelevant. That illusion shattered the morning I found a neatly folded letter pinned to my cabin door with a strip of official-looking HOA tape. No greeting, no introduction, just an aggressive demand that all shoreline structures were now under the oversight of Sunset Valley HOA for the safety and aesthetic uniformity of the community. They required 2 sets of keys to my cabin, one for their administrative office and another for their private security team. The absurdity was almost laughable. I wasn't a part of their community. I didn't pay their dues. I didn't sign a single damn paper tying me to their empire of fake smiles and passive-aggressive newsletters. For a moment, standing there with the letter flapping in the crisp mountain wind, I actually chuckled. They must have made a mistake. Maybe some overeager intern filed the wrong paperwork. Maybe they didn't realize they were stepping way outside their boundaries. I tossed the letter onto my kitchen table, poured myself a strong cup of coffee, and decided I'd sort it out with a polite but firm response. But deep down, somewhere between my gut and my spine, a quiet unease took root, the kind of feeling you get when you sense that something is coming, something messy, loud, and ugly, something that isn't just going to go away with a friendly chat. It wasn't just a cabin they were coming for. It was my right to exist outside their control, and they weren't going to give up easily. At first, I thought the letter was just a bluff, a badly written mistake that would blow over with a single conversation. I wasn't naive, but I had enough faith left in basic decency to believe that a polite reminder about property rights would settle it. I crafted a response that very evening, short, firm, and crystal clear. I attached copies of my deed, highlighted the fact that my land had never been encumbered by any HOA agreements, and sent it off by certified mail to Sunset Valley's administrative office, along with an email for good measure. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. No calls, no visitors. I allowed myself to believe it was over. I even joked about it with a few buddies at the local bait shop. how some overeager HOA president had thought she could lay claim to half the mountain with a couple of strongly worded memos. We laughed it off over beers and fried catfish, and I pushed the whole thing to the back of my mind. That is, until the second letter came. This one wasn't taped to my door like a passive-aggressive Post-it note. It was hand-delivered by a man in a stiff navy blazer who looked like he hadn't smiled since Reagan was in office. He knocked on my cabin door precisely at 7 a.m., like he was serving a damn warrant. I answered in my flannel pajamas and boots. Hair a mess. Coffee not even brewed yet. He didn't even introduce himself. Just thrust an envelope at me like it was a grenade. Sunset Valley HOA. Urgent compliance notice, he barked, before marching back down my dirt driveway like he had more important cabins to harass. This time, the letter was longer. 4 full pages of formal nonsense dressed up in bureaucratic jargon. They referenced new regional safety ordinances and community-wide shoreline oversight initiatives, citing imaginary statutes and non-existent policies. But the core demand was the same. They wanted 2 sets of keys to my cabin. Not requested, demanded, with a compliance deadline and a warning that refusal could result in sanctions and enforcement actions deemed appropriate by the board. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so deeply unsettling. The arrogance dripped from every word. They acted like they already owned my land, like I was just some wayward tenant who hadn't gotten the memo. I could almost see them sitting around a polished conference table in their matching polo shirts, deciding that my independence was an inconvenience they could simply paper over. I knew better than to take it lightly now. I drove straight down to my attorney's office in town, letter in hand. Carl's been practicing property law longer than I've been alive, and he took one look at the papers and whistled low. "They're gearing up for a fight, Nick," he said, tapping the letter with a knuckle. "They're setting up a paper trail, hoping you get scared and cave before it hits court. That, or they're stupid enough to believe they can establish control just by pretending they already have it." I wasn't about to get scared. We drafted a formal cease and desist letter on Carl's letterhead, attached notarized copies of my property title, historical surveys, and county records clearly showing the cabin as an independent parcel. We demanded immediate withdrawal of any claims, cessation of harassment, and an apology. I mailed the packet overnight, feeling a hot satisfaction in every step of the process. Let them choke on the legalese for a change. A few days later, I received a response, if you could call it that. A smug corporate speak email from Tammy Lawson herself, the president of Sunset Valley HOA. No apologies, no acknowledgement of the documents. Instead, she doubled down. "While we respect your attachment to the property, it remains our position that community safety protocols supersede individual claims of sovereignty. Failure to comply will be interpreted as non-cooperation with mandated community initiatives, and Sunset Valley reserves the right to pursue all necessary remedies." I sat back in my chair, the anger simmering low and slow in my gut. They weren't backing off. They were escalating. And the worst part? They were framing it like I was the selfish one. I was endangering community safety by refusing to hand over my keys to strangers who had no legal standing whatsoever. I realized then that I wasn't just dealing with entitled neighbors or lazy administrators. I was dealing with people who believed they could simply declare ownership over whatever they saw and expect the world to fall in line. I finished my coffee, cracked my knuckles, and smiled grimly. They had no idea who they were messing with. 2 weeks passed, and things went eerily quiet. No letters, no emails, no men in navy blazers. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the HOA had finally realized they were barking up the wrong tree. I even started planning a weekend getaway to the cabin, imagining long evenings fishing off the dock, sipping whiskey by the fire, and listening to the loons call across the water. I packed up early Friday morning, tossed my gear in the truck, and made the winding 2-hour drive into the mountains. As I turned onto the dirt path leading toward my property, the first thing that struck me was the absence of my usual view. There was something new blocking the tree line ahead, something metallic, cold, and out of place. A fence. A massive, gleaming metal fence wrapped entirely around my cabin, stretching down toward the lakeshore like some dystopian prison barrier. Fresh concrete footings, barbed wire coils at the corners, and bright red signs plastered every 10 feet. Sunset Valley HOA property. No unauthorized access. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. I stopped the truck, got out, and stared. My mouth went dry. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I jogged forward, boots crunching on gravel, and reached the fence. It was locked tight with a heavy industrial-grade padlock. Through the bars, I could see my cabin, standing alone inside this absurd cage, like a bear trapped for public amusement. A private security vehicle idled nearby, and two bored-looking guards leaned against the hood, watching me with the dull indifference of mall cops. One of them, a chubby guy with mirrored sunglasses, raised his hand lazily. "Can't enter without HOA permission," he said. "You're trespassing." I barked a laugh, sharp and humorless. "Trespassing, this is my land." He shrugged. "Take it up with Sunset Valley Management." I don't remember the exact string of words that came out of my mouth next, but they were creative enough to make the guy stiffen and slide a hand toward his radio. I backed off, barely, forcing myself to think instead of act. I had to be smart, had to be surgical. I got back into my truck, drove a little way down the road to get out of sight, and called the sheriff's office. When Deputy Morales arrived 20 minutes later, I could practically feel the tension radiating off him as he looked over the scene. He was a good man. I'd met him before at the local diner, and it was obvious he didn't like what he was seeing. "You're telling me this is your land?" he asked, flipping through my deed and maps that I kept in the glove compartment. "Been in my family 70 years, I said. "Clear title, no liens, no encumbrances, no HOA. He whistled low under his breath and pulled out his body cam. "Mind if I record?" "Please," I said grimly. Together, we documented everything. The fence posts driven deep into my soil, the warning signs, the altered landscaping where they'd bulldozed over part of my old stone path leading to the dock. Even my little wooden sign, the one my grandfather had carved by hand, reading Garrett's Retreat, was ripped out and tossed aside like garbage. Morales called in a formal report of illegal encroachment and property damage, snapping photos from every angle. He tried talking to the security guards, but they clammed up fast, radioed someone, and eventually peeled away without another word. By sundown, my cabin still sat imprisoned. That night, I camped in my truck, parked across from my own stolen land, seething in the darkness. This wasn't some mix-up anymore. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a clerical error. This was a full-blown invasion, a hostile takeover dressed up in corporate platitudes and fake security jackets. And now, they had declared war on the wrong man. The very next morning, just as the first golden rays of sunlight spilled over the ridge, I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. I was sipping bitter black coffee from a thermos, still stewing from the night before, when a convoy of SUVs rolled up like some low-budget government motorcade. 3 shiny black vehicles emblazoned with the Sunset Valley HOA logo pulled up to the edge of the fence, and out stepped the queen herself, Tammy Lawson, flanked by 2 men in matching windbreakers and clipboard-wielding smugness. Tammy approached with the kind of confident strut you usually see from people who mistake their title for actual authority. She wore an expensive pantsuit, completely impractical for the mountains, and designer sunglasses that probably cost more than my first truck. Without waiting for so much as a hello, she began speaking like I was some unruly student she was forced to discipline. "Mr. Garrett," she said in a voice dripping with rehearsed patience, "I trust you understand why we had to take these actions. It's about community safety, about maintaining uniformity and protecting property values." I let her words hang there, absurd and weightless against the backdrop of pine trees and lake mist. "You do realize," I said, keeping my voice calm, "that this land is privately owned, always has been. It has absolutely nothing to do with Sunset Valley or your HOA." Tammy offered a condescending smile, like I was a confused child who didn't understand grown-up matters. "Community interests," she said smoothly, "sometimes require a broader interpretation of jurisdiction, and when individual property owners, such as yourself, refuse to cooperate for the greater good, the board must act proactively." One of the clipboard guys nodded solemnly, as if she'd just quoted the Constitution itself. I folded my arms, feeling the slow burn of rage rise up my spine. "Broader interpretation. You built a damn fence around my house. You locked me out of my own property. You put up signs claiming ownership. That's not interpretation. That's trespassing, illegal construction, and fraud." The second clipboard lackey cleared his throat awkwardly, glancing at Tammy. She waved him off. "Let's not escalate, Mr. Garrett. We believe this can still be resolved amicably if you agree to the compliance terms we previously outlined, which involve me handing over my keys and pretending I don't own my land," I said, deadpan. "Yeah, not happening." For a moment, the professional mask slipped, Tammy's jaw tightened, and her eyes flashed with something far less polished, pure, naked irritation. "You're being extremely selfish," she hissed, her voice no longer sweet. "This isn't just about you. Your refusal jeopardizes the integrity of the entire lakeside community. Children use that shoreline. Families depend on regulated access to ensure—" I cut her off with a short, sharp laugh. "No. What jeopardizes the community is people like you, who think community means bulldozing over anyone who doesn't fall into line." For a second, no one spoke. The wind rustled through the pines. Somewhere out on the lake, a loon let out a mournful call. Tammy straightened her blazer, regaining her composure. "Then you leave us no choice." She turned sharply, signaling to her entourage, and the three of them retreated to their SUVs with military precision. As they pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Tammy through her window, glaring at me with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I knew that look. They weren't backing down. They were planning something bigger, something dirtier. And the next time, they wouldn't just bring fences, they'd bring lawyers and lies. I didn't have to wait long to see what Tammy's no-choice threat meant. Barely a week after our standoff at the fence, I was served at work. Right there, in front of my coworkers and my boss, by a process server who shoved a thick envelope into my hands like it was a time bomb. Inside was exactly what I expected. Sunset Valley HOA was suing me. The lawsuit accused me of unauthorized occupation of community property, intentional obstruction of HOA initiatives, and, unbelievably, public endangerment by negligent maintenance of shoreline facilities. They demanded immediate forfeiture of the cabin, full turnover of all keys, and financial damages for community disruption. I should have been furious, and I was, but mostly I was stunned by how brazen they had become. This wasn't even just harassment anymore. This was outright fabrication. It didn't stop there. Attached to the lawsuit was a set of maps showing that my land had supposedly been incorporated into Sunset Valley's boundaries through an amended plat filed with the county. The date on the document? Less than 6 months ago. And the signature authorizing the adjustment? A scribble that barely resembled mine stuck awkwardly on the bottom of the page. They had actually forged my consent. I almost laughed out loud when I saw it. The signature was so obviously fake, it looked like a child had tried to copy my name from a coffee receipt. Still, forged or not, this was serious. HOA wasn't just bullying anymore. They were playing dirty, trying to use the system itself against me. I got on the phone with Carl, my attorney, and by the time I finished explaining everything, he was swearing a blue streak loud enough to set off his office's voice-activated assistant. "They're out of their damn minds," he growled. But if they think they can win by stacking lies on top of more lies, they've got another thing coming. We wasted no time. Carl filed a counterclaim accusing Sunset Valley of fraud, trespassing, slander of title, and unlawful encroachment. We demanded full restoration of my land, punitive damages, and public correction of the fraudulent filings. The next few days turned into a whirlwind of activity. Surveyors were called. Title experts were brought in. We dug up county property records, tracing every boundary line back to 1952, complete with the original hand-drawn maps my grandfather had submitted when he built the dock. Meanwhile, Sunset Valley cranked up the propaganda machine. HOA newsletters painted me as a rogue, a lawbreaker, even a threat to community harmony. Residents who had never so much as waved at me before started posting angry rants online about how irresponsible property owners endangered their children's safety. But beneath all their noise, one truth stood tall. They had no legal claim. No matter how many lies they told, the facts, cold, stubborn, and written into the very soil of this land, were on my side, and I intended to bury them with it. The courtroom felt cold the morning of the hearing, the air thick with that electric tension you get right before a summer thunderstorm. I sat there at the plaintiff's table, my hands steady, my back straight, feeling every ounce of the weight they'd tried to crush me with, and every ounce of the defiance that had brought me here. Across the room sat Tammy Lawson and her army of HOA board members, all dressed in identical suits, like they were attending a funeral they didn't realize was their own. Tammy barely met my gaze. For the first time since this entire circus started, the smugness was gone from her face, replaced by a tight, nervous rigidity. When the judge, a stern woman with a sharp eye for nonsense, entered, you could practically feel Sunset Valley's collective backbone turn to jelly. Carl opened with a hammer-blow argument, methodically laying out the timeline of harassment, the unlawful seizure of my property, and the grotesque audacity of their forged documents. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The evidence screamed louder than any speech could. When our expert witness, a county surveyor with 30 years of experience, took the stand and confirmed that my land had never, not once in its 70-year history, been part of Sunset Valley, you could see the color drain from Tammy's face. But it was when the forensic document analyst testified that the so-called amended plat was an obvious forgery, different ink types, altered signatures, mismatched paper, that the real nail was driven into their coffin. The judge leaned forward slightly, fixing the HOA's attorney with a look colder than January ice. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, voice cutting through the room. "This court does not tolerate attempts to subvert property rights through fraud, coercion, or fabrication." Tammy tried to salvage what little dignity she had left. She took the stand herself, spinning a pathetic story about clerical errors and miscommunications. Carl shredded her under cross-examination. Every lie, every contradiction, every shady maneuver unraveled right there in front of the packed courtroom. By the time he was done, Tammy looked like she might melt through the floor. When the judge finally delivered her ruling, it felt like the mountains themselves were listening. All claims by Sunset Valley HOA were dismissed with prejudice. My land rights were reaffirmed and entered into permanent public record. HOA was ordered to pay $300,000 in damages, plus the full cost of repairing my property. Individual board members, including Tammy, were personally fined for fraud and document tampering. The HOA's corporate status was suspended pending a full state investigation, and, in a final blow that felt almost poetic, the judge referred the forged document evidence directly to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Tammy Lawson would be lucky if she didn't end up behind bars. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the verdict was read. I caught a few smiles from people in the gallery, locals who had come to watch the spectacle, tired of HOA tyranny. As I stood gathering my papers, I met Tammy's eyes one last time. She looked hollow, like all the air had been sucked out of her world. No bravado, no threats, just the stark realization that she had gambled everything and lost it all. I walked out of that courthouse into the bright Colorado sun, feeling like a man who had wrestled a storm and come out clean on the other side. Justice wasn't just served, it was engraved into the damn mountains. The weeks after the verdict were nothing short of glorious. News spread fast around town, faster than gossip at a Sunday pancake breakfast. Sunset Valley's mighty HOA was in ruins. Their once pristine clubhouse sat abandoned, foreclosure notices slapped onto its polished glass doors. Tammy Lawson resigned in disgrace, and I heard through the grapevine that she was selling her house at a painful loss to cover her mounting legal fees. Some even said she tried to join a new HOA across town, but the board took one look at her name and laughed her out the door. As for me, I decided it was time to make a statement of my own. It started with the fence. That ugly metal monstrosity they'd put up around my cabin. I didn't just tear it down. I threw a demolition party. I invited everyone from town who had ever suffered under HOA nonsense. We handed out hard hats, baseball bats, and sledgehammers. I even rented one of those old construction site speakers and blasted classic rock while we worked. There's something deeply satisfying about watching a smug no trespassing sign shatter into 1,000 pieces under the swing of a hammer. By sundown, the fence was gone, reduced to a twisted pile of scrap metal. In its place, I built something new. A beautiful wooden archway at the entrance to my land, carved with bold letters. Garrett's Retreat, private property, HOA free zone. Freedom lives here. And just for fun, I hung a battered old mailbox underneath it. On the side, I painted in bright red letters. Keys. What keys? The town loved it. People started stopping by just to take pictures. It became a bit of a tourist curiosity, a tiny symbol of standing up to the system. But the real cherry on top came a few weeks later. With the lake access once again wide open, I decided to host an open invite freedom festival at my cabin. Fishing contests, grill-offs, live country music. The works. I set up a giant inflatable slide straight into the water. Kids ran wild, parents relaxed in lawn chairs, and the air smelled like barbecue and fresh hope. Halfway through the day, someone, nobody quite knows who, floated a life-size cardboard cutout of Tammy Lawson onto the lake. They'd dressed it in a life jacket and taped a sign to its chest. Lost authority. If found, return to Sunset Valley HOA. Oh wait, never mind. The entire shoreline roared with laughter. I stood there on my dock, cold beer in hand, laughing until my sides hurt, feeling freer than I ever had before. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It wasn't even about protecting a piece of dirt with a cabin on it. It was about reminding everyone, including myself, that standing your ground matters. Because sometimes the best fences aren't the ones that keep people out. They're the ones that keep your spirit wild and your soul untamed.